Afternoon, everybody. We are having a good conversation this afternoon with Lawrence Lemaoana and Georgina, Maxim. And the topic for today is contemporary African art. And I think maybe just to give a preface in terms of the title of the talk, I think it was generated out of a conversation thinking about what it means, or what do these terms really mean, when we say African art or contemporary art. What is the difference between the two, and what do they actually mean? So I was really interested in bringing to the table artists who are working on the continent and artists who participate both within their region and outside of their region, to think about how they are seen both within and outside, and how these categories are defined by the canon, and also by whether people within the continent and the diaspora actually embrace these labels. Mm. So I think just as a general preference, I think this is also coming out of thinking about how, especially in the more recent years, and then maybe the last, I would say maybe 10 years, one has seen a growing interest in African art, or especially contemporary, what's considered contemporary African art within the market space, where you're seeing a lot more African artists being sold. You're seeing a lot more African artists having exhibitions internationally. So I'm kind of curious to think about whether, how does this terminology or this categorization function within this sort of international, global sense of the market? Is this something that is still appropriate to be used today, or is this something that continues to have a certain currency because it's connected to a certain historiography? So I just wanted to start with maybe the most basic and simple question, what is contemporary African art? And maybe then we can see where we end up as we think about individual practices, but also in terms of the landscape of art production and what has been happening in the marketplace. Maybe, okay, since I'll start with you, you can go ahead, Lawrence, and maybe give some thoughts.
I think for me, one of the things about my experience in the art world.
Sorry, before you, I'm sorry, I forgot. I didn't do something. I was supposed to give maybe introductions to both of you. So maybe I think the best thing, what I will say is that Lawrence is an artist based in South Africa, who works particularly with textiles. In fact, both of you work in textiles.
Yes.
And Georgina is based in Zimbabwe, also a really prolific artist working with textiles. But I want both of you to maybe give a few minutes of introduction of your work and something about how you then can respond to the question of contemporary African art.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you can use, and then I think you can use the images here. Then that will give some context as people are thinking about, what they've seen and what you say.
Okay. So Lawrence was the one who was going to start talking. So,
sure.
Yeah.
So I will share some of the my screen to kind of maybe begin. So I utilize these kangas, and I use them in a quite particular way, because they have like quite interesting and significant meanings.
Maybe sorry to interrupt you, but not many people are going to know what a kanga is. So maybe can you?
So a kanga is a fabric that is worn by women all over Africa, especially East Africa. And it's a functional kind of object, but also it has like spiritual, cultural, and political meanings. And I think more significantly, one of the most famous ones was the kanga that was made in Kenya when President Obama won the election, and one was made to commemorate him. And so the interest in the fabric actually began a few years ago when we had our former president, Jacob Zuma, and he was on a rape trial, and he uttered these kind of words that were quite how do you say that were quite dangerous, but also quite significant. He said that the woman that he has alleged to have raped was wearing a kanga, and so and therefore that gave him it signified for him permission. And so I'm interested in this word and kind of unpacking it. And I realized that what he did was he appropriated the meaning of and use of the kanga in East Africa for his own defense. And so it became a really interesting object for me. And then the other thing that became quite interesting for me was the fact that in South Africa, we do have kangas, but they're not used in the same way. They're worn by sangomas or spiritual diviners, and they usually come in red, black, and white. And they are produced in Asia, and they're used in South Africa as spiritual objects. And so I was very much interested in this kind of hybrid kind of object that has spiritual meaning and so on. And so what I utilize it for is that I reference headlines that you find in South Africa, and usually they have the red top headlines. They usually have the name of the newspaper and then whatever headline that they or whatever news that they're trying to share. And so I've utilized these kind of fabrics in political terms. I've referenced literature. So, for example, this one here was one of the first ones that I did, and it was a referencing Chinua Achebe's "Things Fall Apart." And I think for me, it was like referencing the time of the work. It was done, I think, 50 years after Things Fall Apart.
Sorry, Lawrence, are you showing images, or because we're not seeing any images?
Is it not appearing?
No.
No, I was about to. I didn't want to stop you. We're just seeing your computer screen.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
Second, let me go stop sharing and then. Sorry.
But because you were talking so well, I
yeah.
I didn't want to stop you.
Let's have a look. Does this appear?
Yeah. Now it's now we see it.
Yeah. Now
okay.
It's
so yeah. So this is the kind of and these are quite for me quite interesting kind of utilization of the textile. And so in my research of my work, I found that text and textile have got a similar meaning in use I think in Latin or in Greek, and they both mean to weave. And so they've allowed me to kind of weave narratives and kind of combine literature, combine popular kind of phrases in the work. And then I think I'll sorry, that's another word that I wanted to share. So this one here is kind of politically charged. It's a headrest that is made out of bronze, and it's chrome plated, and it kind of again signifies a political kind of comment in that when the South African government buys fleet cars, they buy these X5s, which are which are symbols of a status and power. And so what I did was I took appropriated the headrest and made it into something that is contemporary, or that is speaking to the contemporary kind of situation in South Africa. So my work is kind of dealing with that. It's this kind of notion of appropriating things and putting them together to kind of give off a different meaning, but also commenting on the current situation or the current kind of political situation. And then, so this one here is a work called I Did Not Join the Struggle to Be Poor. And this one here was a reference to one of the ANC politicians at the time who was leading, who was asked in a press conference why he has business interest as a member of parliament or as an entity of government. And he literally said, "I did not join the struggle to be poor." And I found that to be quite an interesting kind of notion to kind of think about, this idea that There are people who join the struggle, put their lives on the line, put their families' lives on the line for the a particular kind of freedom. And how do they now, in post that struggle, reflect their hard-won freedom, and so this notion of freedom and power becomes quite interesting and diluted in terms of its meaning and how it can be imagined. So I usually kind of extract these phrases, these political phrases, and try to utilize them to kind of what do you call it? Create debate, create a platform to interrogate power, to interrogate what it means to be a free kind of individual. And then this is a current body of work that I've just exhibited. A few years ago, I encountered the word drapetomania, and I loved the meaning of the word because it was a word that was created in 1856, I think, by a doctor in the south of America, and it literally is a disease called freedom, and that's what the meaning of drapetomania is. And I think about how that word is still in operation today. So to kind of explain the term drapetomania, drapto is a Latin word for runaway slave, and then he combined it with mania, which is madness, and I kind of linked it to freedom fighters who have got this malady, or the people who are always kind of like speaking for freedom as individuals who have drapetomania. And the other link to this work is an encounter with a figure that appeared in a documentary called what do you call it? It was about a character called Ambrose Boyimbo, who stole King Leopold's sword during the handing over of power from the Belgians to the Congolese. And for me, he was somebody who symbolized drapetomania. So I'm working within these kind of like archetypes that are African, but have got links to other places in the world that speak to freedom and what freedom means. And I think for me that's basically what my work has been about in the last while. Yeah.
Okay.
Nice.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
Okay. Maybe before we go to Georgina, can you then maybe say something about this question, or this definition about what is contemporary African art for you?
So what is interesting for me, I think one of these definitions are for me quite interesting, because I think they have a life and a kind of oxygen that sometimes is kind of like manufactured for strange purposes. So I usually like to kind of look at these terms in terms of not as a singular kind of what do you call it, or having singular kind of meaning. Mm-hmm. And the references that I like is Chimamanda Adichie's like a talk where she talks about the danger of the single story, and she kind of like the notion that like a term or something has got multiple meanings, and we need to kind of embrace that. And so the contemporary African art means, at least in the context of my experience as an artist, was kind of maybe made by the exhibition that Simon Jami curated, Africa Remix. And one significant for me was that Africa Remix came to South Africa. And for the first time for me, I got to see, you know, a kind of like a different rendition or different kind of like treatment of African art, because I got to see artists working in diverse kind of like processes, that it wasn't stuck in the kind of like making of artifacts, but creating interesting kind of cultural objects that had like much more meaning than one that is isolated in Africa. It was about, I think, artists who were working within Africa, but also in the diaspora, people who are able to kind of transact between these two kind of, or these multiple verses, and kind of still maintain their rootedness in Africa. So so it becomes a very interesting and complex kind of meaning of a term. It becomes a problematic term because, again, it's one of those terms that, like, I don't know if it was rooted in Africa, or it's one that was made elsewhere and kind of applied to Africans. So it's one of those terms that, like, I think have got currency, and then artists who do utilize it, who do kind of like exploit its meaning to kind of enter into the markets.
Okay,
so,
I'm going to stop you there because I want to get to Georgina. Cool. We'll come back to that. Yeah. Yes. Okay, Georgina, your platform.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this discussion. I believe you're going to put some images of my works.
Oh, yes.
And yeah,
absolutely.
And then I can start talking about that. But I often like to start from the point that I initially wanted to become a painter, but even studied it, and it was one of my major subjects in university here in Zimbabwe. But when I got married to the painter that everybody knows, I had to hide and renovate myself. But it was quite easy to renovate myself because I came across a very interesting bag of clothes left behind. And it was a time when I was beginning to search for certain things in my life. And the clothes that had been left behind belonged to my grandmother. And I was beginning to want to defy what tradition always tells us. So my journey of becoming a textile artist is about trying to defy tradition. We have a process of, I think many people have listened to my interviews or have read some of the stuff that I do write or the interviews that have been written down, have heard this story over and over again, that I try, when we mourn our dead for 3 days. And in those 3 days, the processes of that are basically the same. I think Lawrence also can understand that because we are all Bantu people and we go through the same processes of mourning our dead. But it's the fourth day that makes it a little bit different from me, which involves a little bit of violence, firstly, because the deceased person's clothes, not only the clothes, but also part of his estate or most of his estate has to be distributed to the people that were closest to him or her, to them. And there's a special process that is no longer being practiced today, which is the pricking of the clothes, which gives permission. I will use the word permission, which gives permission to be able to restore that garment when it begins to wear and tear. So there were some places that I would go to a funeral and see this process being done, and them not doing that particular process, that permission to allow you to mend it when it starts wearing and tearing. So for me, it became a violent process because I don't remove the cloth from the skin. I try to put it very close to each other to try and make it like it's absolutely one thing. And maybe it's not, because there's the part where everybody has their favorite tie, their favorite dress, their favorite jacket, or their lucky dress, because every time they wear it, something good happens to them. And for me, it started as a journey of trying to preserve those things that belonged to that particular person. So sometimes people think it's a bit scary to then go around looking for people's dead people's clothes to try and preserve that memory. But I'm extending it, and I'm not making it the violent nature of not allowing the permission to mend it. So I do a lot of sewing and stitching, weaving, crocheting in my work, and I try to find the work that used to belong to someone. It could be probably a distant relative.
Sorry,
or
do you want me to do you want me to go through the slides, or you just?
Yeah, that would be
okay.
fine. Yeah, that would be fine.
Okay.
The one that one remains my most favorite and special one, because in the base of it, which can become like a canvas to me, was my grandmother's one of her dresses, and I kind of like opened it up, made it look like you know how we do the chicken, open it up and it becomes like a butterfly.
Mm-hmm.
And I took over 2-3 years to go through this dress and actually create something out of that. And I called it Shabby Agnes. She was quite a dignified and pristine woman, a teacher as well. But the reason I called it Shabby Agnes is because I kept struggling with it. I would cut it up and start again and do more sewing on it, and kept looking for more and more clothes that belonged to her. So every single piece that has been attached to that, I know exactly where it has come from, and it's one of my most favorite artworks. Yeah. Well, sadly, I don't have it anymore. So I try to show I've sent an image showing the detail of what actually does happen, because there's a sort of like a meditation process that happens there. Because the cloth that is being attached to it is not the same. You cannot find it being repeated in the same area. But it's not a conscious effort. It actually happens quite subconsciously. And the only thing that reminds me that you are in the process of sewing is that sometimes I'm very careless and I prick myself. But it's I've now started calling this kind of stitching dungem tunge, which is a Shona word that says it's so haphazard. It's not following any particular direction, but it's quite haphazard. And that's something that is very evident within any community where you meet up people who are trying to make ends meet. The clothes are probably in tatters, but the sewing is also in tatters. It's like there's no care in it. There's no need to try and cover up my desperation or my poverty or myself. This is who I am, and this is how it's been like for years. Not that I'm saying they have no chance of changing it, but it's something that I keep picking up when I look at these garments and people. So I thought it.
Yeah, there's a sense that because there's so many different types of fabric that are knitted together, but there's this almost a sense of like a desperation of bringing so many things together, in a way that feels very fragile, because it's not there's no sense of permanence.
No.
But it speaks about this, the I guess the idea of mobility, how, when we move to different communities or different places, how we try to build community, that it's always a tenuous process that becomes very difficult to maintain. So there are all these threads that are not only about where we come from, but where we're going, trying to connect. Because I see you use different colored threads too.
Thread and cloth as well.
Right. No, I think for me what is interesting is the abstractness, this construction of an abstractness. It's things losing, particular identities to join a particular. Yeah, it's beautiful. Wow.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. That's also. So if you remember the image before that, it shows I don't know what the front is or what the back is, because the stitch will show at the back. And then if you look a little bit lower towards the orangey and the yellowy thread without most of the cloth showing, there was a time when I began to see that I'm losing the stitch. So I then started revamping the work and showing the front and the back, mixing it up together. And one of my friends said to me, but are you not beginning to try and control what is happening now by you making sure that you are making people understand this language, the language of the stitch, that at the back it looks like that and at the front it looks like that. It was a very good question, which up until today I'm unable to actually answer, why it started off like that, to try and show both ends. But it was because I looked at the back one day and the back became more and more interesting than what was happening at the front, because I'd become so comfortable with the front, and whatever the front is was the pieces of the cloth being shown that they have been attached to this particular base dress. So I often use, most of the time, 95% of the time I'm using women's clothes, because I understand them. I have a connection towards them. I have a connection towards the dress and the responsibility that comes with the dress. Many have asked me, what do you mean by the responsibility? It's because you are standing and the wind is coming and the dress is a flared one. You are supposed to be responsible to hold it together, to not allow it to fly off. And then there's that issue that if a child is seen running around and unattended, and if they see a woman wearing a dress, they expect that woman to make sure that they understand why this child is not being attended, or does this child belong to you? So there's a lot of responsibility with a dress. And even when you're seated, you can't just sit like you're wearing a pair of jeans. A dress teaches you to be very responsible about it. So there's that that heaviness that a dress carries around. It's something that I don't take very lightly with the dress. Now that is a ready-made machine. Lawrence, what do you call that? A doily?
A doily,
yes, doily.
Yeah.
Which also I found lying around in back home. But at the back, if you finish the design pattern of the doily on top, there is still some white on white stitching and sewing that was happening there. I go through these phases of picking, of becoming monotonous, because I probably would have gone through a lot of color, and then I become tired of color. And then I want to start not seeing color. And then I work with white or red or purely black, and become very monotonous in that. And those are quite difficult to do, because they don't give you a chance to be free, to run around, to change. They ask you to be as strict as possible. And I think it's also a process that one goes through and tries to pour out whatever it is that is going through them. Well, mostly it's because there are certain things that I would like to address personally before I begin to do more research. And then there's also the fact that I do it quietly and by myself. A terminology that I've picked up, which is called alone but not lonely. When I go through this hand stitching and yeah, it's part of the process. Yeah.
So maybe going back to my question, which I also asked Lawrence, is in your words, what would you say is then what is this? What does being a contemporary African artist mean for you?
Well, because I used to sit in a lecture room some 2-3 years ago, the definition that always came was the art from Africa today, which I said, well, okay, but you're making it sound like there was no art coming from Africa in any other day. So it becomes another question that you start asking, if you just want to put it into the context of today. And then people want to break down the two words, contemporary and then African. And then a lot of other artists that I speak to don't want to be boxed in the issue of African. They just want it to be contemporary art, because it's something that they are doing not only to be fed within the continent, but to also spread and become a global what's the word that I want? A global discussion. Let's put it like that. So sometimes I come up with these questions like, why then does it have to be African when it can just be contemporary art, the art of today? Yeah.
I had an interesting encounter a few years ago. I was invited by a university who had just bought my partner's work, and it happened to be in Ohio. So it was they invited us to come sit at their meeting of contributors, and what was interesting was that in this meeting they had the global map to kind of show where they've bought and
every artwork, yeah.
So this is where we've got this kind of art, So I think the kind of notion of the contemporary is maybe something that is consistent, but the kind of geographical kind of like terminology is what defines what is in fashion at the moment. And I think that's where the thing. So it's almost like this categorization that needs to be satisfied. I was saying that like it's something probably that's like generated elsewhere for us to kind of contend with, and therefore we lose sight of what has been contemporary all along.
Yeah, because I think you're right, because the reason why I ask this question is that where is the agency in this idea of contemporary African art? Because it is about what kind of knowledge does it perform? Because I think the terminology itself is a result of a post-colonial condition, in which I think, you know, before African art used to be seen as traditional, and now we've kind of moved beyond that. But now we've moved to the sort of contemporary phase, which still separates Africa from the rest of the continent.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
So my question, because I feel that we've had a lot of exhibitions, you know, you mentioned, Lawrence, the exhibition of Simone Jami, Africa Remix, but then there's other exhibitions that happened before even that. For instance, Magicians de la Terre.
I was going to say about
in '85, you know, even though most of us never got to see it, but it was a breaking point in which the notion of contemporary became present within the canon.
Absolutely.
You know,
and I think for me, like there's also like another interesting kind of categorization. It's also like, you know, the kind of breaks with the past. So I think for me, art that was produced in the 1990s, post-apartheid South Africa defined a kind of like contemporariness, in a word. And so that contemporariness kind of maybe is about how the kind of utilization of non-traditional methodologies to create, in terms of fine art, but open and porous to other kind of possibilities of, you know, conceptualization, etc., which is something that I think most contemporary African arts kind of like utilize as a license to go into that global space, to kind of say like, okay, I am African, but like I have these methods that are coming from the West, but they're not. So I think for me that is the you know, some of the kind of like areas of thinking that define what, you know, African contemporary art. But I think for me it's also like this idea of trying to kind of work with the fluidity of identity. That it's about being like Mercury. You can't clamp it down. It's always like moving.
It's always in motion.
It's always in motion, and then you can't necessarily grasp it. But then it's still within that container of like, what is it? What is it being labeled from the outside?
So the question. Okay, go ahead, Georgina.
Maybe we'll be dwelling on it much longer, but it's something that when Lawrence said, it drove me to remember about the Nsuka group of art school. That of course they were I might get into trouble for saying the wrong things, but I admire how they managed to evolve the decorative manner of decorating the body, of decorating their houses, and then taking it into part and parcel of their work, and then beginning to forge the contemporariness of that. I quite like that. And I spent a great deal, admiring that whole process of what the Nsuka group of artists were trying to make. And even up until now, the footprint is still there. And it's very important to try and always remember that. Of course, I should look at my own country, but it's the Nsuka that made more, it gave me that thing, that said, okay, this is the contemporariness that we have been, that these are the guys that have ushered us into this contemporary art. Yeah.
So, for instance, when we look at somebody like Picasso, Picasso's, influence, Picasso's being influenced by African art.
Thank you. I was about...
and and we don't see that as being, Picasso has become Africanized. We don't. That's not what we talk about. No. Instead, we talk about how Picasso becomes a genius.
Yes.
And yet at the same time, we can't look at African art and say, well, the makers were genius because they inspired so many different artists to work so differently. The surrealists, you name it. So this is why I come back to the knowledge production. What would you say are some of the because there seems to be in my sort of overview of the landscape that there seems to be both agency and exploitation happening. Agency in the one sense that the terminology allows a certain international embrace. So you have agency to be exhibited anywhere you have, but it's still under these conditions of this label. Which is where the limitation comes in, because as you say that, a lot of artists don't see themselves as African because they're just making art. It's contemporary art. But the minute it leaves the studio, which in most cases when artists produce, the work is meant to communicate beyond the studio. So once it leaves the studio, ends up in whatever exhibition, whether it's local or international, it begins to acquire,
that
things
title
that are
all over again.
Things that are beyond the artist's control.
Yes.
To some degree, because the artist still has a choice to say, well, I don't want to be under this banner. I can remove my work. But we all know that opportunities are limited. And one has to understand.
You can't stop people from writing what they want to write.
Right.
You can't be going to every other person and saying, do not put me under this label, contemporary African art.
Right.
So you are quite right that it does end up out of the studio. It feels like we no longer have any rights over it, but it ends up being put under this umbrella, contemporary African art. So does it work to our advantage
that's my question.
To do that? I think, unfortunately, I'm going to agree with that. It does actually work to our advantage. Look, Africa will always be an interesting continent, and no matter what happens to it, no matter we are riddled by these political, economical issues, we are still going to be forever an interesting space to be at. Look, we right now in this day and age in 2020, I promise you there are a lot of people who still consider us as a country. Don't see us as a continent.
I'm one of those kind of like people who kind of sometimes vacillate between these philosophical thinkings and art making and art history and so on. And one of the kind of like spaces that I often go to is Spivak's Can the Subaltern Speak? And one of the things that like she raises in this kind of like Gen's essay is how the idea of the West always kind of giving platform to Africa, right? We're giving you display your work, we're giving opportunity to, but at the center of it is the West speaking to itself about itself. So there's always like a kind of decoy to decenter, but we are still centering ourselves. And I think it's what you the example with Picasso is similar to that. This idea of like you don't credit the original kind of like
the source of it.
It's about and then if you kind of put things on a platform. So I think those are the kind of like interesting mechanisms that like make these things alive, that give them oxygen, that like this notion of Africa is always about being named outside of, you know, Africa. And so I think for me, those are the kind of like the interesting kind of processes that of how do we speak back, how do we write back, and write ourselves in. And then there's another book that I often reference is Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, where he talks about himself as being invisible, and it's like one of the most beautiful lines ever. And I really was connected to this book because it was kind of linking some of the process that I was thinking about: masculinity, blackness, and appearance and visibility. And then Toni Morrison asked a question. It's like, okay, so you are an invisible man, but invisible to who, right? Mm-hmm. And I think about this kind of idea of constantly being looking at ourselves, utilizing other people's views. So then we need to be responsible enough to self-determine by looking at ourselves through our eyes, through the idea of not being determined outside, but determining ourselves. And that's why I think for me, even just in my work, this notion of freedom or this search for this freedom is about how do I contain myself or look at myself with my own processes and not necessarily utilize foreign or at least alternative eyes to look at myself. But at the same time, I do need to celebrate the fact that like I can stand outside of myself and look. It's almost like an out of body experience.
Right.
This is reference to how, for example, in my kind of development as an artist, one of the biggest things that I did, or realizing that like the South African art space is a petri dish, by standing outside and looking at how there's a network of people that are in operation with each other. And I think for me, those are the kind of like alternative views that kind of like allow for this, again, give oxygen to the term, but also it's about me trying to find a self-reflection. Yeah.
Mm. So the one other aspect I want to throw into this conversation is that, you know, especially this insider and outsider relationship, because yes, again, when we talk about Africa, we're not only talking about people on the continent, because Africa yes, is beyond the continent. So there is the diaspora community, which also adds a different dynamic in terms of understanding and identifying with the continent. So, you know, I think when you know, Georgina, you mentioned this notion that, yeah, you know, that it does add value, this embracing or working with this category, because it does also offer a certain kind of agency within the context in which maybe you as an artist working on the continent doesn't have, you know. And I'm kind of curious in terms of thinking about trying to understand, you know, how does the diaspora, because it seems to me that there's less of a desire to, no, maybe not, there's more of a desire in the diaspora to claim the idea of
the Africanness.
The Africanness.
Yes.
Because of the disconnect, because of the displacement, because of the history. And so how do you struggle with that when at the same time, you know, artists are trying to wean off these colonized labels, you know? So there is this...
There was a time when I listened to, or is it because I was reading Chika Okeke, I think it must be Chika Okeke, and the fact that he quite honestly said that it seems as if for an artist to be able to make it, an African artist to be able to make it, he needs to leave Africa and be somewhere in one of the other continents, and then begin to draw again from Africa. You've left Africa and then you are now somewhere in another continent, and then you are now beginning to draw that that Africanness back to where you are now, to be able to make it, to be quite successful. I sort of kind of agreed with it, because I then looked at myself as an example, and I said, you know, there was a time when I felt, you know, I'm okay, I'm content, I'm in Harare, I'm in Zimbabwe, and I'm going to make things happen whilst I'm here. Created the collective village, you know, together with Mishek, my husband, and began to, you know, to try and make magic. But only then to realize that you become sidelined for the mere fact that you have no connection to anything European, Asian, or anything of that sort. It's like the acceptance has to come after you have been in one of the other continents, which is a huge pity. A huge pity for me. It's sad, yeah. Lawrence.
I mean, I think you know, one of the biggest examples for me, at least like locally, is the celebration or the elevation of Lady Smith Black Mambazo. That the collaboration with Paul Simon, like almost like gave them the international platform. And I think that's, again, you know, one of those kind of things that become symbolic of, again, how do you become contemporary? How do you become local? The only way to kind of how do you say find street cred is to collaborate with a Western kind of and so that's why I think like these notions of a global South and these global kind of processes or global speak actually kind of reinvigorate this idea of, you know, contemporary African and so on. And then I think about the notion of agency. I'm one of the interesting characters that become functional is the Hal Foster's the anthropological insider. That sometimes people take up the role of having to explain Africa and translate it and make it palatable to the West. And I think that is the other thing that like is another currency that is in operation. How you can stand to be the, how do you say, the looking at yourself or your community through another viewpoint which is not local, and there's a sense of novelty as well. That like, how do you look anew at the ordinary? And I always like kind of think about it again, how sometimes even within this notion of like the local view, I was doing a project research a few years ago on the taxi industry in South Africa. So the local taxi, and one of the things that it did, it forced me to look at mapping, because the taxi industry is a self-made business, and it started in the 70s or in the 60s, where Black people were not allowed to transport each other. So the taxi industry became a system where people who were friends would take the same car and so on, and they were breaking the law, and then all these kind of interesting mechanisms happened. But one of carpooling and and so on. And then what happened was that in the 70s it became legitimized and so on. But I think what was for me interesting was that the kind of mapping of the township was a very constrained space. And I always tell the story of how I realized that like Soweto, for example, is a fortress, and it was a situation where we used to wake up at 5 in the morning as children and so on, and then catch a taxi that takes us to town and gets us to school. And so I had to wake up at 5 in the morning and be out of the township of Soweto by 6 o'clock. If you didn't leave, you would be late for school. And so what was interesting is that I realized that like Soweto had like 5 exits, and people were bottlenecked into it when you leave. And then there was also the idea that like there was no intention of giving Black people cars, so that the idea of a future was not necessarily comprehended on. And so only a few years later I realized that I was in a maze, that I didn't realize how the mapping kind of like operated. And I think that's why I'm saying, like, there's also like a value in standing outside of these mechanisms, understanding how the situation happened. And so this idea of seeing the collectors sit and look at the global map and say, we are going to, is for me interesting and strategic and powerful. It's these kind of ideas that like we need to exploit in terms of, oh, that was the boy. The boy was...
The children. The children.
Yeah.
We understand because...
Well,
no, we get it.
Yeah. So for me, I think these kind of like categories are actually also opportunity to kind of rethink our identities and reimagine them. And you know, so you know, gosh, now I lost my train of thought because of that boy.
Blame it on the children.
The sociologist will kind of like gosh, now I really lost my train of thought.
Okay, maybe it'll come back. Let me just quickly shift this. So now, because we're in the moment where the world over is much more sensitized to issues of Black Lives Matter, you know, and institutions across the world are now trying to also re-look at themselves in order to understand whether they actually have been, you know, instrumental in supporting white extremist ideologies. Because sometimes, you know, it's just in the manifestation of the structure, how some of these institutions have kept Black people out, how to this day, it's still majority of them are still white, you know, controlled.
Yes. Yeah.
So I am just wondering to what extent then, you know, coming back to your question about how, you know, for instance, is it just in the buying power that is it enough to say, okay, now we're going to shift focus and focus on Black artists or African artists or African American artists? Is that an enough strategy to address our current and present, you know, moment of political address in terms of racial equality? Is it enough to say, well, we're going to employ more Black curators to be on staff to address this issue of, you know, increasing the collection with more equitable representation? Is it enough to say we will have scholarships within academic institutions that support a small population of, you know, students of color? So all these questions, you know, which are now current and which address issues of race, which address issues of, they all have a historical precedence. And I think you're right when you say that, you know, it is about how do you then think about these issues from a position of not being in it, but from a macro perspective, because I think being in it, you're so dealing with it every day that the macro is harder to imagine. So when I'm looking at this idea of contemporary Africa too, you know, I'm thinking, okay, you know, how can we redress the constant knowledge that surrounds this notion of contemporary? Because now it's over 2, 3, 4 decades we've been dealing with this notion of contemporary, and it's been expanded a little bit, but how do we just break out of it and think of it as what needs to be done for it to become just contemporary art?
We're suffering a system that we know there's a system, and we don't know how to kill it. And even if we know how to kill it, it will refuse to die. Unfortunately, it will definitely refuse. It's a virus. It's a serious virus that even if we say it's mutating, it will still be there. It's sort of a pain to hear you want to try and change that. It's painful to also realize that these are some of the questions that we ask ourselves seated together. How do we break this system? How can ourselves there's
a kind of like almost like a deja vu kind of idea that comes to mind, where I that like maybe there has been moments like this before. There has been moments kind of like a collective focus. I think, if I think of, South Africa in terms of the during apartheid and the international, energy, in terms of like anti-apartheidness and like international marches and so on, where there was a kind of like a sense of collaboration in the liberation of South Africa. And what is interesting is that like it's now another deja vu, another kind of like moment of upheaval. And I feel like there's a talk that I went to a few years ago where one of the speakers I can't remember her name, but like where one of the speakers is that every time you think of these kind of changing moments, all you need to do is look at history, and you realize that we've been here before. And so in as much as I kind of like feel it maybe the intensity is a bit more. I feel that not only Black Lives Matter, but roads must fall, or fees must fall, or all these kind of like movements are gaining momentum. Is you realize like what happens beyond that? It's almost like this idea of like how Martin Luther King said, I've seen beyond the mountain, and now we are over the mountain, yet we are still kind of dealing with it. And it's almost
with these
like
issues, the
infrastructure itself is unchanging. The other reference that I think about is, for example, the Johannesburg police station, which used to be called John Foster Square, and all that happened there was that it did what it always does. What they did was they painted a different color, different design, but it still kind of did the same thing. So it's almost like the most impossible task of trying to dismantle what these systems are aimed to do, and it takes generations, it takes time. I mean, what did Baldwin say in one of the videos? He says all of these kind of racism and all of these kind of energies, they've taken my time, they've taken my children's time,
my grandchildren's time
taking, and so we never actually get anywhere, and all of this is like, oh, we find these gold nuggets of like, oh, moments of reprieve, but actually work is still continuing.
It still is there.
Yeah, it's again like the idea that racism is always a distraction. It stops you from doing the work that you need to be doing. And I think for me, these moments, in as much as I celebrate them for what they are in terms of their spontaneity, I am suspect of the fact that like they will be quelled in some way. They will either be bought out or be or betray themselves, or and only to kind of generate another movement.
So then would the option be then for us to sit back and allow
no. It's never going to be an option to do that, to sit back and just say, oh, it's happening, because
I'm saying I'm saying this as I'm saying this as somebody who is got faith in art, in the kind of capability of art to transform people's lives, because I think I'm subject to that. So I benefit from it, from all of these things that we are talking about, that have like these double movements. The first move, relieve you from your condition, but at the same time remind you that you owe your being to it. You owe your freedom to it. So I think it's the kind of multiplicity of identity in me working as an artist, but also teaching at various institutions and trying to kind of invigorate young people to kind of think deeply about the way that the world is fixed, the way that
I think I think if we as artists and any other person who is in the creative sector decides to follow this simple statement that we need to give or to make a clear perception of what Africa is, very, very clear perception of what it is, then some of these things can begin to change. The system can begin to bend in a manner that can probably cripple it, because I have accepted it's not going to die. But if I can be able to cripple it, and then I'm giving it a huge disadvantage that it's no longer able to move as quick as it used to. It has to be cognizant of its disability now. So if I can strive to make a very, very clear perception of what Africa is, then I think we can get somewhere to making it. One
of the most interesting things that I kind of think about in terms of these kind of institutions and their capability to respond sometimes quickly or sometimes slowly to issues, that it's the fact that they're almost like self-governing. Like one of the things that I think about is the fact that like these are private institutions. For example, the most successful ones that allow for things to happen are privately run. So it's kind of like try and change those because they self-determine, and we wanting to be part of that. If I think about, for example, the idea of Barclays Bank, which came to South Africa for a few years ago and left. One of the things that like keep on kind of ringing in my head is the fact that like the Barclay brothers were slave traders or slave owners, and all they changed the kind of, what do you call it, change their business model to kind of keep away this history, this dark history, but at the same time the essence of it is this kind of like negatively affecting kind of model of business. So I think
and I was going to say I think the part of what I feel is the elephant in the room is the fact that Africa doesn't have the economic capacity at the moment. We have the resources, but we don't have the capacity.
I was about to say that we have the resources that are being mismanaged very badly. Yeah.
So as a result, I think, because we don't have the capacity, it's easier for institutions to exploit us.
Yes.
And to determine the kind of framing of, our intellectual property, because we don't have the institutions or enough institutions on the continent to say, okay, you know what, we're going to change the game.
Yeah, this is what we're going to do.
This is how things are going to happen on the continent. We don't care what happens outside the continent. So that artists, wherever they might be, if they want to participate and want to be part of this is the kind of new thinking we need to adopt.
I mean,
and that's going to reshape.
So in terms of this notion of capacity, I think about, historical figures that have like warned us about this. I'm thinking about how, Fanon once said that the African economy will be a caricature of the West, and it play out in so many kind of like levels, in art, in material resources, that there's like the capacity kind of idea for me is quite interesting. That I think there is capacity. It's just maybe it's the interest to kind of change things. It's the fact that there are too many people who are vested in the system as it exists to kind of change. It's like we are all somehow complicit to this notion of being, unfree, or this notion of like being named outside of ourselves. So
I think at the same time of being complicit, I think it also has to do with, a sense of, because I think there has to be a rupture in terms of the idea of re-education, because the implicity is, in a sense, is a result of the same educational system being in place that perpetuates the same kind of ideology. So how do you...
Decolonizing also the education system.
Yeah, exactly. So that needs to happen in a way that it offers a new platform of thinking in terms of how these terms can be redefined, or how these terms can begin to function somewhat differently, or be challenged in ways that make sense for who they represent. So I think I don't know, we're going to get to questions in a minute. I don't know, any one or two last thoughts?
Yeah, I mean
I know there's a lot we've like.
No, they definitely is quite a lot, because you try and hold on to one thought, and you can expand it, and you expand it more and more and more. But I think what we have completely touched on, which is about the system, we will continue to discuss it for many, many years. And once I'm happy today that I've been able to identify that there's this system which I'm not happy with, and I know to kill it, it's not going to be that easy. Yeah.
So one of my also interesting kind of go-to books is the Haitian Revolution book, and the kind of ways in which maintain what Haiti is, for example, and the idea of like kind of being locked up. So when you revolutionize and you kind of like speak back and you do things that are you pay heavily for that. And I think that's also like the thing that for me is quite interesting, that like I'm thinking of the Black Jacobins. Yeah. How so when you really stand up and say like, now I'm going to revolutionize, there's a kind of lock-in syndrome that you kind of get stuck in, where you kind of create almost like a so it's and I think for me it's that cynical kind of perspective is constantly in operation, and I think that's what for me kind of
but Lawrence, should an opportunity arise for you to be in one of these big museums, Tate, we're not gonna turn it down.
Right.
We're not gonna do that, because it's a level that lifts us up and makes us feel like, you know what, we are now acceptable. And again, we're falling into that particular system that when you are exhibiting in such a space, you are now acceptable as an artist,
right.
And then all these contemporary African art statements come back in a flash and in a flood, and you can't do anything about that. Yeah. Sorry.
I mean, so one of my little tales is that a few years ago, I happened to be part of an exhibition at the Louis Vuitton Foundation in Paris, and
wow,
it was. I mean, like, I've never been so well treated. I've never been so put on a like first class ticket available.
Wow.
Hotel available, limousine available. It was like really interesting and really a really profound moment for me. But one of the most kind of almost like lightning moments was that the Louis Vuitton Foundation is built on a park, and I often kind of like have this like insider outsider kind of perspective about me, and I was looking at all the artists that were coming in, and they were doing photo shoots, etc. And what was interesting, I had my son and my wife with me, and so we walked out the back gate of the back entrance of the museum, and we walked into this park, which is like really nice and beautiful. And there were all these signs that were all over the place. That it was in French, of course, and it was like Parc Acclimatation, and the park was basically a human zoo, and
really.
It was a human zoo until I think the 1950s, and so I was looking at myself being transported and like being treated in this way and having this comparison. And so sometimes these things are so close to each other, so right next to each other, that it's impossible to kind of like define. So there's the rejection, like say like, no, I'm not gonna have all these niceties. But at the same time, you realize there's a historical precedence to this, and how do you decode that to kind of enter into these spaces in a different kind of way? And so that's what I'm saying. Like it's a continuous lesson. It's a continuous kind of like, it's always like an attempt to kind of peel back these glossy surfaces, and and how do you peel back that loss of services without destroying the infrastructure of what made it possible for me to be there? Yeah. So
Yeah.
It's a hard struggle.
It's hard.
And I think, you know, on many levels, because there's also the level of which maybe, you know, that the work also speaks not only, you know, or the work is maybe not only critical to the system, but it also speaks about, you know, the desires and aspirations of the diaspora community. You know, so that adds on a whole nother layer in which, you know, sometimes we forget, but it's, you know, Africa is everywhere. So to say that it's one thing is really limiting, because I think
absolutely.
Wherever you go, there's Black people, you know, or the Black people have been there. So
exactly.
Even though the histories might be slightly different, but they've been there.
I mean, I mean, there's a book that one of the South African artists, one of the lawyers wrote, "The Land Is Ours," and so I come from a background of playing rugby and like kind of loving this game, and then finding out that, like, you know, I'm a Black man in this like historically Black a white game, etc. And one of the factors that this book kind of indicated, that already in the 1800s, there were South African Black people who were traveling abroad. And it was mind-blowing for me, because like, it's almost like I knew of history, but I didn't know the history. And so, and this kind of process of unlearning is a continuous process of not only looking at one's own desires and how they shaped and formed, but also what actually put them in there in the first place. And so that, I think for me, that is the kind of the work that we need to do. You know, this process of continuous deconstruction, rethinking, reshaping, unlearning, relearning, and yeah.
So there's a question. One question just came up. Somebody wants to know, is that how do we do that? How do we create those new institutions that are stable enough to make change?
How were other institutions created in the first place? Yeah.
Well, I mean, if we just understand, with the understanding of what we already know about institutions today, but then the question is, how do we create new institutions? If we can't transform the existing one, how do we create new institutions that are stable enough to make the change that we want? That are flexible enough to change democratically?
I think, yeah. Just, sorry.
I come from a collective background, and us having created this collective, which we call Village UNO. Of course, now we have identified that there are problems within collectives, which is very normal. But I think it came from, you know, the need to do that, to address some of the things that we were seeing that were missing, which is something that we're all trying to discuss here, that we are seeing that there's something that is amiss, there's a system that is not unwavering and changing. And if we are able to then uphold and actually change the direction of whatever it is that we continue to, we're not complaining about them, but we're discussing them, and we have identified that these institutions and the way that they function are not exactly what we are all aiming to become, or to leave a legacy about ourselves behind, then I think they can be very simple to create. Identify that there is something that is amiss, address certain patterns that are no longer functioning or are no longer viable in today's time and age. Then they can be.
I think that's a really interesting kind of perspective, that the idea of community, and I think that they are systems that are already in operation, and the concept that I encountered in my own research of like the taxi industry and trying to kind of make this sculpture that was I tried to think of what informed this object, the idea of a taxi, and one of the things that I found out is that like there's an operation or a mechanism that people utilize, and a kind of, the French equivalent would be bricolage. In the town it's called Ngokotelo. In India it's called Jugad. And so I think for me it's about looking inward and looking at these concepts that are already in operation, fitting in, or at least furnishing these institutions that we're thinking about from the local. How does how these local networks actually kind of benefit how we think of institutions? So it's almost like not renaissance, but like I'm thinking that it needs to be like a process of not just injecting Black people into systems, but those people being the system themselves. The famous kind of maybe examples of this is an essay that says people as infrastructure, and it talks about the kind of like migrant Africans who are operating in South Africa, who've kind of created communal networks to kind of help them help each other to kind of exist in the environment and thrive. And I think it's about rethinking, looking at the blueprint of institution as a term, but looking at local kind of systems.
Okay, no, I think that's a good, because I was going to throw in, when you look at, for instance, here in the United States, a place like Studio Museum that promotes particularly only Black artists. And then you look at an institution like Zimbabwean, which supposedly is only showing contemporary African art. But very different institutions, but I'm just thinking of like, what kind of agencies those institutions have, and whether they also are implicit in the structuring and in the structuring, even though they are promoting and obviously doing, well, at least I know Studio Museum is doing an amazing job with young artists. But to what extent is it also contributing to actually changing the language and the way we think about how? I know that's a bigger question, but I think it has to be part and parcel of the whole package. Right? We can't separate to say, well, right now we're only interested in building institutions, and I think for me, like you're saying, Lawrence, it's not only about brick and mortar. It's about knowledge building. How do we do that? In ways that in ways that help us think about how we function in the world. Help us think about where we can make interventions, where we can disrupt certain
and
kinds
also make
of
an impact.
It doesn't always. It's not always about the brick and mortar, even though sometimes that's how we think, because everything around us is brick and mortar. That's how people value material objects. Once they're collected.
So I think for me there's really interesting kind of, I think society has got so many interesting kind of operations. For example, in Johannesburg, for example, you have these open fields that are unoccupied, that have become churches, right? So you have people who put a flag down, and that is their church. And
Southern Africans are the same everywhere.
So I think for me, and what I find interesting is that there's a kind of like interesting kind of porousness to those kind of spaces where you don't need an entry point. You are already on the ground,
on it,
right? And I think for me that is like alternative ways of thinking. But I think what becomes problematic is that like it's the attempt to create the equivalent of, or the attempt to kind of like counter what is already happening by mimicking what already happens. Is that we need to be rethinking of different strategies and tactics in order to kind of think about institutions differently. And like, so, which is a contradiction, is to think about what do you call it, institutions by not thinking about institutions.
Institutions.
It's about kind of going to the ground and in looking at these mechanisms that are, I think, in society already in operation, like looking at these networks of people. So these churches have got networks of people that like make it what it is, right? And I think for me that's where we find answers. The other kind of like
to go back to what you just said now, but where do we find those in the art world? We see it in the churches, but where in the art world?
Individuals, because I think what is interesting is that like we've got books, we've got I think about you know what is this
but these are writers. But these are writers, yeah.
Yes, and I think for me, like it's I'm one of those people that kind of like try to find ways in which texts manifest themselves, and so that people like books like The Pedagogy of the Oppressed can become a really interesting tool in thinking about how people are representing represented in space. So the what is interesting is that also like they're also diverse kind of processes. So you're talking about what do you call it, artist groups, people,
collectives,
like collectives who form institutions in themselves. For example, Gabi created a group a few years ago, and that was really interesting because it was like, again,
NGO, right?
Yeah, thinking of like different ways of mechanizing and still be satisfied with the production process. And yeah, so I think as an artist, it's quite difficult and impossible to kind of think about, you know, the institution in the way that the institution thinks about itself, or at least the people in the institution think about themselves.
I actually found that question a little bit difficult because when it comes to the visual artist and in the sense of you using the example of that church and the symbol of just the flag being enough to say that this is where we are and this is where we're going to meet. What kind of flag do we use as ourselves as artists to say this is where I am and this is open for everybody else? Can I just take the example of the flag as our own artworks, or there's something else that we can identify ourselves with that?
Yeah, it becomes a catalyst. It becomes a kind of like a kind of a keystone, something to kind of surround ourselves under or around. I think so what I'm saying, like I'm trying to kind of like think about the institutions that you're talking about, the, you know, Zeitsmoker and think or Johannesburg Art Gallery, and think about a different way in which those kind of like institutions exist. Is that maybe it's the way in which it's formed, the way in which it's structured that needs to change for it to have a different meaning or different outcome. It's almost like that. I think what it is, we are good at identifying the problems. Good at locating where the soft spots are, but to kind of the kind of healing possibilities becomes a task too impossible because we are so close. We are the ones that are being wounded that it becomes difficult to heal ourselves.
Yeah, it's a good point. Good point.
Yeah, I find that, like, for example, people speak about safe spaces to kind of, we need to kind of create those safe spaces to express ourselves, to be able to kind of like thresh out these kind of like issues. And we don't have enough in terms of like, you know, the art community. For example, when I stayed at August House, and August House was like a big warehouse building with studios and artists kind of like living, and everybody kept their doors closed because and
it's probably their safe house, their safe space for the moment. Absolutely, it's probably their safe space at that moment.
So one things about the community in that way, like what kind of communities have we kind of formed in the way that in the way that we operate. There's an individual individualistic kind of what do you call it, desire or fulfillment that we get from being artists. So yeah, it's difficult. It's tough.
Yeah,
it's a tough one, and it cannot just be unraveled easily. No, it's a tough one. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think we've touched on so much so far, and I want to. Last question is maybe come back to our current reality of COVID, and I just want to ask, like, how, as artists, how are you, or how has this moment inspired or informed your current practice? Because I think we've all been isolated, we've all been, dealing with a lot of loss, dealing with a lot of transformation. So I'm just curious to understand, how does all this, or is it in any way sort of translating in your works?
Sure.
It was heavy for me. It was a heavy time for me. There were many ways of escaping being, stifled with certain issues, but it was quite a very heavy time for me. But I still did not stop working. I still created, and even if I tried to create works that did not show the heaviness, it was difficult not to show it. So it was a very heavy time. Yeah. I won't lie.
Sorry, sorry, Lawrence, let me just quick. Did you find that in continuing to make the work, it provided a certain kind of release or relief or refuge?
Yeah, there was the time when the monotony of saying go to your work and create became a huge toil on me. But I had to say, no, this is not monotony. This is life. This is language. This is supposed to give a sense of reprieve in one way or the other. And by then beginning to discuss that by myself, and then being able to then speak to my husband about it, and allowing him to also understand that this is the quagmire that one is in. It became much lighter. Of course, he too had his own struggles. The chance to just be free to walk out, to meet the people in the streets or in the family or anybody else. And I took it for granted, for a long time. I took it for granted that one could just jump in and go wherever they wanted without the fear that, am I not exposing myself or exposing the ones that I'm going to see with anything that I'm not sure I have or I don't have. So it was a very challenging time, very challenging time. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it became a really powerful kind of rapture, and I think in terms of for example, in South Africa we had our lockdowns, like strict lockdowns in April already, and that was basically kind of you are in your house. I think it was one of the strictest like lockdowns internationally. In your house, and you are only allowed to kind of travel to the store for essentials once a week. There were kind of police kind of barricades in places. They deployed soldiers to kind of monitor the spaces and people, which was also like quite intense. And there were several people that lost their lives from the kind of brutality, and so that was quite a what do you call it, a forceful kind of like reminder of the kind of depths in which humanity is able to operate in terms of mitigation, but like in terms of like aggression. So you had this like, invisible thing that was omnipresent, and it controlled our movements, and so what it did for me, it operated as a almost like a refuge inward. So it kind of like again kind of like became a process of thinking of family and being more what do you call it? Locked down, locked in, and then the other factor was again the kind of language in which was used to kind of describe these processes. I can't get over the fact that it's a lockdown, and I think about how the word operates in the American system as a prison system where you are being monitored and so on, and so I think what it did, it kind of gave me interesting kind of vocabularies to kind of think about and think about ways in which to kind of like think about freedom. And funny enough, the Drapetomania work actually became much more operational, much more important in these lockdowns. So it influenced positively, I think, for me, the work, and it kind of gave me a whole new kind of like way of thinking about my work. And then it also becomes interesting that like the kind of ways in which it shows up our resilience as human beings. I think it's a test of that resilience, but also it showed up that resilience, but also it showed up the kind of social inequalities. So the idea of us being able to be locked down and being okay, and then having family members that were not okay, that you needed to kind of take. And for me, that was quite interesting. That like all these like kind of like social kind of decays show themselves so much. I was complaining about how, for example, in this high lockdown where the economy was apparently kind of in ground to a halt, there was something like 19 Porsche Cayennes that were bought internationally, that were brought into the country. There was Lamborghinis that were bought into the country. And I thought that was quite interesting. So there was a system for us and then a system for other people who was to transact in these kind of like hard times. So that actually, that's what I'm saying, like it fueled my thinking and my suspicions about how human beings are always in a kind of operation in these times. You know?
Well, thank you very much, guys. It's been wonderful talking with you and hashing out some really interesting ideas. And I'm sure that the conversation is ongoing, of course, and I'm really appreciative for your time. And I also want to thank Kiera for organizing this platform for us, and look forward to connecting again soon.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. This was really interesting. Like,
take care. We're getting out of the woods now, eh?
Yeah, it'll come. I mean, like I think some of these ideas that we've developed are going to come in the work somehow, because it's really to kind of like be able to retrace our steps and think about these ideas.
That's true.
Great.
I'll be glad to meet you when I come to Joburg, or when you come here.
Definitely. We're not far from the airport, so
We are neighbors, and it's so easy for us to just dot in